Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, where we dive deep into the media industry headlines and dissect the digital disruption that diverges the masses into the new media counterculture and away from the media establishment. Here is the king of podcasts.
Welcome to episode 224 of the Broadcasters Podcast. This is KOP Radio. I'm going to declare it as dead. What a horrible time for radio. Podcasting is holding its own, and as we have talked about many times on the program, we know that I'm going to claim it now, podcasting is Radio 2.0. Where radio is actually thriving, where the best hosts are, where the best content is, that is radio. It is not on FM or AM radio. It is not being transmitted through towers, through effective radiated power on AM or FM, kilohertz or megahertz. It's just not. And I'm a radio guy. And I was a radio guy for a long time, but I am very sad of this industry and what it's done. You know, after we remember, I'm the same guy that really buried radio, celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Remember that? And I'm saying to myself, we're here, and, you know, radio has the NAB radio show, the NAB show that they go to, and Bob Pittman's out there and talking with, you know, folks at Entercom and Odyssey, and they talk in the fact that, I mean, look, regardless, they're owned by, there's private equity that owns iHeartRadio, and how they're being run and being mismanaged is pathetic. There are only a handful of radio shows that have been around for so long, that have stayed under contract for so long, and they're so long in the tooth anyway, it doesn't make a difference what happens to them. Radio's never looking for the new voices of the future. They don't want to be the voice of discovery. Meanwhile, other stations in other countries want to. They just choose not to. You know, it's really funny where I'm looking at the music industry, and you know, for a couple of weeks last month, I specifically talked about music and the staleness right now, the lack of new music that's been coming out. In February and March, we're just dead. We didn't have any major albums. We have a lot of stagnation on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, which, I mean, I don't even know how many number one songs we've had, but really, when you look at the number one songs we've had and how old they are and how they've just not gone anywhere, I can look at the chart right now. I want to look at songs that are normally only on, that are on for a long time. Look, besides Harry Styles As It Was and First Class by Jack Harlow, which were only out in the last couple of weeks. Heat Wave still remains number 3 on the chart with 66 weeks. Big Energy by Lotto is 6 months on the chart and only starting to make its run finally here, and is now the most played song on radio, on pop radio. Enemy of Imagine Dragons, 22 weeks. 41 weeks for Stay, Kid Laroi and Justin Bieber. Morgan Wallen, Don't Think Jesus is number 7, but that song will come up and out off of streaming. Doja Cat, Woman, 38 weeks, but this song was at its peak, I don't know, back in January, not April. And then look at Super Gremlin, Kodak Black, 24 weeks on the chart, and 30 weeks for Ghost and Justin Bieber. And that's not counting what's after that. You're talking about Shivers, Bad Habits, Ed Sheeran, 32 and 43 weeks respectively. And these are songs that automatically made it to the chart and made it onto radio because they're established stars. It's that tried and true method. If it's a star that has staying power, that automatically will have a song that will automatically resonate because it's the brand name of a star, then they're going to play it. But if it's a no name, they're not going to give it a chance. Well, they're trying to do that now, because there's not that many songs to work off of. They have to rotate songs off of their playlists. And when you look at what they have now, you know, Post Malone of the Weekend one right now, I don't even know if it's charting right now. That's up there. Sweetest Pie is up here. It's not even, I don't even know if it's listed. They do have Dove Cameron and Boyfriend, which should get some more play, but, you know, with her background in Disney and all the work that she's done, she should be up there. And she's got a major Instagram following to really bolster, you know, interest in the record. Camila Cabello with Bam Bam is in here. And you look at Bayhole with Lum Little Bug. That radio is playing now. Lizzo, About Damn Time, they just added that song, but that doesn't have any real staying power either. But they're really they're struggling to put songs together that will make the chart because they don't have those established stars putting out records. I mean, Justin Bieber just put out a song. Miley Cyrus is putting out an album pretty soon. But really, those noticeable names, radio doesn't know what to do with themselves at this moment. You know, they're taking some stars that already had songs that were hits before and putting them up somewhere. So 5 Seconds of Summer all of a sudden gets a chance on the charts in radio airplay. But otherwise, when you look at stars that are on this chart now in radio airplay, the media-based top 40, and you're looking at how many artists that are basically one-hit wonders, and they're not going to be around for long. Like Glass Animals, I don't think they're going to get a follow-up because that song, Heat Waves, goes back to 2019. When you look at Lauren Spencer Smith, well, she has a second song now. Let's see if that's going to pass. That's going to pass muster. But, you know, she was in the American Idol system. Wasn't even looked at. Was passed on. Gail, which there's a lot of talk about she's an industry plant because she's with Atlantic Records. And, you know, they're trying to make her look like she's an independent star. And Bayhold is now under Republic, so now she's getting play. But before that, she was a TikTok favorite. Trending on TikTok. And then when I keep looking, the Walters, I Love You So. You know, I've seen them on the lower end of the Spotify chart and on the lower end of the Billboard chart. But really, all of a sudden, they're getting a chance to get played up here, too. GNR Choi to the Moon, that's a TikTok song. Regardless, that's what it is. Love All for Nothing. Like, they're just picking songs and just hoping they become something. But they're not following the charts because the charts right now themselves, there's just not that much new music to go out. And you know why? It's because radio's not doing the right thing by it. So when it comes to radio, they failed music. They fail it. They're not the place where they can where people can discover new music. Because they did, some of these songs they're giving a shot at, and they're just kind of like, you know, throwing the dice at, they would actually chart, and they would actually go up to the top of the charts, but they're not. And even with the Billboard algorithm playing towards radio now in terms of airplay, that's why the songs that are on the top of the chart are the ones that are listed highest. It's because radio airplay is still being considered. And I have said to Billboard many times, stop doing that. Streaming is where your audience is. You want to say Billboard, you know, you want to say radio has, you know, so many hundreds of millions of listeners a week? It's just because they happen to have the radio that might turn on by default in their car. But we talked about the story about how there are less people with actual radios in their car. Are they actually picking up radio stations on their smart speakers? Do you really think that? If you do, listen, I'll sell you the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. I'll sell it to you right now for $1. And how radio still is allowed to go and do this. They have their multiple pipelines of advertising revenue, which they cannot monetize for the life of them. I mean, there are still people that do listen because they will get people to go to events. But other than that, I mean, the things that radio used to do to promote, to lure people to listen. I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. Back in the day, you used to have to give away prizes and money and all this other stuff to get people to listen. But they would. And they would engage. And then when you played new songs, they would resonate on the charts. You could sell records. You can still sell records. You can just sell them digitally. But you're not doing that. And then you're homogenizing the format. In very many senses, you know, there are certain genres that still do okay. Country or hip hop or R&B or, you know, but there's not much. You don't read a lot about many success stories in radio where radio is billing and doing so well. I mean, even with, you know, talk radio, you have a lot of stars that have gone out the way because they have dropped. Like, there's an older audience on radio as well, especially the talk side. And there's only so much you're going to make off of them. There's just not much left of all of this right now. The radio companies are working to go ahead and do ad sales for other entities. Like for, you know, iHeartRadio, they can use when they bought Voxnest, which owns Spreaker. Well, yeah, they're getting their advertising placed over there. So their advertisers are getting on board. Well, they're just doing something just to make sure that they can just get their advertisers somewhere. But they're going to get CPM instead of actual impressions they would get from radio if radio was done properly. But they don't do that. They choose not to. And listen, I actually had a good day today. I mean, I wanted to go watch the NFL draft. The Buccaneers were supposed to pick number 27. Well, they decided to trade off their pick, so I didn't get to watch the Buccaneers make a pick in the first round, but that's okay. I was having a good old time. Had a great dinner, everything like that. But when I keep reading the stories that come out about radio and the delusion that is radio programmers out there, notably Bob Pittman. Look, I know his track record. I understand what he's done. But he gets paid a lot. And the radio division, the actual terrestrial video division, is not doing well. They're not making any real revenue. I mean, the same company where he still gets to stay and stays and keeps his job while this company was in bankruptcy and then had to pull it back out. Have they actually made any money since, to try to be solvent in their debt? Have they even done that yet? No, because they can run at a loss. The private equity firms will allow that to happen. They don't care. They're going to just nitpick, and they're going to, like vultures, they're going to go ahead and pick off the carcasses that's left of the terrestrial radio division. But there is value in some of their products, right? In the outdoor division, in their podcasting division, and in some of their other infrastructures that they use, where they bought off resources to use for the radio stations, the automation software that they use, and all the other software they use to operate radio. They bought the damn companies. So it's like they bought everything they need to do radio, but they can't sell it, and they can't program it well. And I really don't think it's that hard. And there's more than enough talent out there they can go ahead and bring on board, pay them money, and make the money. But they don't want to spend money to make money. Not even close. They want to do it like every other corporate outlet out there. And the difference is for an iHeartRadio or an Odyssey or Entercom, they don't understand that, they're not going to do the streaming services much like their counterparts in media, where Disney can put out Disney Plus and Time Warner Discovery can have HBO Max, or CBS can have Paramount, or NBC can have Peacock. No, it's a different story for them. They can have podcasts. They can try to have podcast networks, but they can't replicate the model because podcasting doesn't allow it. I mean, you can create podcast networks, but you're not going to go ahead and create some subscription service that people are going to go and buy, $10, $15 a month for your content. It's not going to happen. But with radio, there's only going to be so many less outlets of their ad representation firms that will get their dollar a holler ads put out there. Because if you listen to the radio, you know how many ads they have out there that, besides some of the local ads that play during the daytime, during day parts. Other than that, you're hearing ads for their own content and a bunch of national ads that are just getting CPM for at such a cheap rate. So they'll have to do just make good on how many spins they actually get of said ads, whether it's online or whether it's through terrestrial. But even the terrestrial ad buys are diminishing less and less. They're not as valuable as they once were. They don't understand that. So let's talk about the CEO keynote from the NAB show that happened recently. It was President and CEO of Odyssey, David Field, co-founder and CEO of iHeartMedia, Bob Pittman. So let's read this story from radioinfo.com/AU. Reflecting on the pandemic and the ever-confident upbeat on the industry, Bob Pittman says that, quote, "I get the feeling we were just getting started, that we have tremendous opportunities, that from the listener side, you're picking up people who the year before valued peace and quiet, and now they got peace and quiet, they want something on, and the audio industry is the beneficiary of that. But it's podcasting, not radio. There's something about not as many people going in the car to go and listen to the radio, and when they're listening to the radio, they're not even listening to it in the car. If they are. And in various markets, I'm truly disturbed by how bad radio's become. And it didn't take much time to really take it where it is now. So the clock radio has been replaced by Alexa. In the same sort of rooms the radio was in and the same sort of usage, number 1 is AM/FM radio, number 2 is weather, number 3 is music. How old is this demographic he's talking about there, Bob? Are we talking about like people in their 50s, 60s, 70s? news and weather, you're getting from your phone, and music, you're getting from your streaming service, not from radio. Unless you want to hear the same songs over and over. Because in the pop radio stations, they're still playing the same songs 80 to 120 times, the same 5 songs over and over. But then the rest of the playlist is just kind of a hodgepodge. Plus, the talent that you bring on board, they're just facilitators. They're just plugging machines that promote. And they're not just promoting what? Websites and Instagram feeds and social media and TikTok, and that's it? That's all they can do. They don't have any interaction with audience. They're not able to go and interact with audience. They have nothing to say about the artist. They have nothing to say about themselves to entertain. They're reading liner cards. They're not doing anything else. You're bringing on people that will just be able to talk and put some words together to fill a liner card that'll go in between a couple of records and pre-record them, by the way, voice track them, not do it live. Or they can record calls ahead of time and heavily edit them to make them sound like something. And when they do, they sound deadpan, they sound monotone, and they don't have much excitement to it at all. Because the personalities no longer matter. The one thing that you had that radio could do was engage and connect with listeners and connect you to the music and give you context to the music you're listening to. Relate to the artists. Relate to what the songs are. They don't do that anymore. So who gets to do that now? Ryan Seacrest? Right? Now, Bob Pittman also says that radio's biggest problem is not thinking big enough. No one dreamed the cable networks would be that big. No one dreamed that the internet would be that big. Well, he's right on that, but there was never a plan for radio to do anything. And you just need to really understand that, AM/FM radio, you can't leave them to these large corporate types. They don't know what to do with it. But there are plenty of local people that can be taking these stations on and doing something with them. I really believe that. Radio should not be corporately owned anymore. It's like some chain restaurants. Sometimes, how about we just get a mom and pop running the station? Now, I can take the fact that if you want to nationalize radio like BBC Radio does, sure, let's do that. And then actually take the time to go ahead and try to build out radio stations that are nationalized that have real content, real listenership, because then all you're doing is you're servicing every station in every market with one radio station that will be well programmed, well put together. You should do that. I would prefer them to do that than to waste their time with all these different stations and trying to cover certain markets, because they're not trying to do anything right now to build that up. They're not. Now, David Field agrees that, quote, we are on the cusp of the best era for radio. That's podcasting there, David. It's not radio. You're not doing radio right now. Radio has gone into podcasting. Radio is 2.0. It's the second generation of radio. So if you're talking about audio, yes. Could be a very good era because everybody's getting a chance at the pie, including yours truly. Including everybody. And those who can rise to the top that will. The extraordinary explosion, Phil continues to say, of content and experiences that we are now offering listeners through technology. We are on the cusp of radio and audio, surging forward and delivering great results. And Pittman says that we saw in the early days of the pandemic the incredible increase in the use of digital devices in the home for radio stations. And they discovered us in some places. And I think they would have never discovered something on smart TVs, Roku, and on, video game consoles, etc. Okay. But if they're going to the stations, audience retention, a familiar voice or voices. I mean, if you're just going to play the music and put commercials in between, you're giving the audience nothing to stay retained to your signal, to your station. Okay? You have to have something more than just the music and just the talk. There has to be something more. If you're a talk radio station, you have to offer a lot more information than just the talk host talking about some political slant. or sports radio having the latest take. You have to have something more. I mean, sometimes you want to make it convenient where you have all this information that, of course, people can go to on their phones, but you know what? You're kind of reporting it to them right then and there in real time. Like, that still is convenient. That still is a luxury. And it can be a necessity if you do it right. Because it takes little to go ahead and prepare. When news happens, when things break, when things are coming up and they're going viral, radio is supposed to be the fastest delivery method to get content out there, to get announcements out there, to talk about stories, to talk about things happening then and there. You're not having to wait for producers and staff and getting cameras and getting live shots ready to go. You, on radio, you get to start things right then and there. And then get your audience engaged in the best possible way. Radio has always been able to engage with listeners. They have phone banks in every radio station, and they could go and use WhatsApp. They could use whatever they want, FaceTime. They could connect that to the board. They choose not to because they don't know how to handle it. Pittman also says, and I think, and now that, of course, as people return to normal habits, usage in the home of these devices is still there. I think from a bonding with audience standpoint, the number one place people get their news about COVID is radio. The most trusted media for multiple people greater than social. I think living through an experience and keeping people company, in some cases keeping them sane, there is a relationship that will be a forever relationship, whatever that bond was, stays. But this is not natural disasters when all of your communications go down and radio is left up. That's a different story when battery-powered radios are all that you have left. So this commentary from Pittman is totally antiquated because they're thinking COVID was this major emergency as if we were going through a hurricane natural disaster every day for 2 years. No, it wasn't that way. And even if you did, you also didn't have people that were in the studios handling what was going on. You had them in some cases, or many cases, broadcasting from home, if you could. Now, Pittman says the challenge for radio is to take advantage of this change in listening habits, to continue to engage the audience, and to remember what it's like to be the person sitting next to the driver in a car. They just don't get it anymore. This is such, do the shareholders even understand what's going on here? How do people still believe in this? How could they listen to the CEOs of two of the biggest radio companies in the world and still listen to them giving us this junk? They're absolutely using COVID as a buffer to explain, there may be a return to listenership, a retention of listeners. But it's not. You're still getting a stagnant audience, an audience that is dwindling away as they go along. Much like they cut cable, they're turning off the radio. And you could go ahead and take the Edison infinite dial research, and you can spin it all you want. 97% of people listen to radio, whatever you say. But your audience is not engaging with you, and your advertising revenue is still going nowhere. Okay, you're going to get a bump in revenue this year because you got a political season, right? And then a couple of years, you'll have another big presidential election. But political season always comes up, and all those political ads, people are just, politicians think, we should go to radio with their ads because they need to spend the money somewhere. The money they're getting in donations, they have to spend it. They can't keep it. They have to spend it. So they even go to radio, which will be easy for them to go and just let the money out there and put it out there. But is it really getting much attention? No, probably not. They just don't get it. It doesn't make a difference. And there's more stories that came out before the NAB show. Surging forward. So they have to put out some word that says that we're getting somewhere. Moving along here. Curtis Legate, the NAB CEO, he says that, quote, "We have tremendous opportunities. From the listener side, you're picking up people who heretofore valued peace and quiet. We already heard about that. So unlike TV, where if I watch one TV show, it comes at the expense of another, in audio we're finding more and more listening time. We're finding solutions like smart speakers that allow us to fill the hole that we're feeling for the loss of the clock radio beside the bed. And then David Field also made this point that was also picked up by bloggers and the radio media. Quote, when you step back and look at the relative competitive strengths and advantages of our business today, and the relative value proposition we offer to customers, and the extraordinary explosion of content and experiences that we're now providing listeners through technology and investments we're making, we're on the cusp of radio and audio surging forward. Well, that's the full, complete line. What content are you doing? Are you talking about the content you're putting out there that's, being repurposed or that you bought out from some other company? The same companies that, like an iHeartRadio, chose not to pay that much or to pay little, and now they're at the point where they have to unionize themselves to get paid because you couldn't take care of them? And remember, we talked about that story about how, I forget which podcasting company was out there. Earwolf, that's right. Earwolf gets bought out. And now all their content, all the content creators, they're getting treated badly because they got picked up by radio. And then the way the content's being procured, being produced, the staffing for it, it's gone away. And the kind of money that we're making, that's gone away too. It's a nasty business. That's why I'm glad I'm an independent podcaster with an independent company. According to WARC, audio captures 31% of media consumption, but only 9% of advertising dollars. Let's say that one more time. 31% of media consumption. So they get 31% of the total audience that wants to consume media. But they only make up less than 10% of all advertising dollars. So you can get a third of people that want to listen to audio or spoken word content or music content, but you can only get a tenth of the money that's being made in media altogether. Well, you tell me how that makes sense. So there's a massive disconnect between audio usage and the share of the ad pie. David Field said the Milestone study underscores the need for the industry to stand up and use data to change advertiser perceptions about the radio. It's a really powerful story and efficacy of what we do. There are advertisers and agencies who have been sold a bill of goods and have a different perception of reality. And sometimes we don't do as good a job as being ambassadors as we should as an industry. We need to make sure that there's no fake news out there in terms of understanding the value of our businesses as compared to some of our other audio competitors. Okay, but you also need to understand, because you want to charge a higher price for terrestrial radio. That's what you want to keep selling as the major product. I understand that. But if you put out a major product on the audio end of your traditional audio, then you can make the case for that. There was a reason why a Howard Stern or a Tom Likas could command so much money from advertisers. But who's out there in radio now that really commands the kind of money that matches that stat right there? 31% media consumption on audio, 9% of advertising dollars. Does Elvis Duran do that? Does Bobby Bones do that? Does Ricky Smiley do that? Does Brooke and Jubal do that? Does Bob and Tom do that? Is there anybody out there that even compares? But nobody's thinking about that. And there's no one that comes into the play that could be replaced right now, that could be brought up as a new show that might build an audience up. I look at some of these shows that get brought up here, and I was like, man, there's nobody out there that's building a major audience that's going to make something big, that could command the kind of ad dollars that match the consumption. Radio doesn't have those kind of stars right now. They just don't. And they don't do a good job of building talent from the ground up. Because that talent will not go to radio. There's nobody moving from another career to radio. And there's nobody in the entertainment industry that thinks radio is an upper echelon place to go ahead and hone your craft and ply your trade. It's not. Because there's no money in it. There's no contracts. There's nothing. If we got back to that again, there are people out there that can absolutely be doing radio and be making some good money off of it. But you're not allowing that to happen, radio. Bob Pittman, David Field. That's not being allowed to happen. They also talk about being a matter of trust. They talk about that the SEC chair, Jessica Rosenworcel, mentioned with misinformation and disinformation rampant across social media platforms, Legate said local radio broadcasters play an elevated role when it comes to delivering trusted info. You know, but that's also towards an older audience, your older demographic. And is radio only going to placate to the older demographic? Is that all you're going to do? Are you even going to try to do something to move forward or no? I don't think there's any plan behind that. So I've gone for 30 minutes ripping on radio because it's very easy to do. A matter of trust, the radio in the consumer's eyes, a story coming out from Radio TV Business Report. Now, I don't have the full story because it is behind a paywall, but they did make this blurb available. When it comes to local TV stations, the leaders who run these broadcast facilities will often share how consumer trust is a key factor in their continued success. And the heads of iHeartMedia and Odyssey have the same story to share. But they still... Consumer trust, I mean, there's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of, entertainment value and respect for the listener. You're not trying to worry about winning their trust. You're trying to win back their interest in being a listener. What are you doing to do that? They're not considering anything right now. No idea. This is another story that came up really quick that I caught last week and caught my eye, and I thought, well, let's go ahead and take this and see what it's worth. Rolling Stone put out a story. This is Jeannie Saraswati that writes, "Pay your respects to radio, the ancestor of podcasting." Okay. So she goes through the full history of radio in a certain sense. A pretty abbreviated but comprehensive look at the last 100 years or so of radio. Now, when she gets into here, she mentions here that although radio was still a prevalent controlled medium, often relied on older audiences for its success. Newer, younger listeners less familiar with radio gravitated towards iTunes and other digital platforms to discover and share audio shows, fueled in no small part by the advent of social media in the late 2000s and early 2010s. But what she is explaining there is that, by the 2000s, that last run of the boy bands and all the certain stars that were coming out in the early 2000s, roughly about 2005, when deregulation really came into play, and iHeart basically bought their full complement of radio stations, and all the other stations were bought up, and you had the control of thousands of stations, all the major market Class A, Class B level radio stations, all clustered by 4 or 5 companies. They decided we're just going to go after the older audience that has money. The newer, younger listeners, they abandoned. That happened roughly around 2005. I saw that happening. With the decrease of the talent they had, that they just continued to lay off talent. And the radio is just getting more homogenized as it came along. And that's what they did. And when streaming became more of a factor in the charts 10 years later, that really eliminated radio with any relevancy to newer and younger listeners anyway. As podcasting continued growing through the 2010s, additional genres found dedicated listeners and younger generations of listeners. Shows like Serial, which blended storytelling elements of fictional thrillers with the draw of true crime, scripted in such a way that listeners became a part of the stories they were listening to as the ones telling it. And now, those that are being written today, the elements have become practically the norm in thousands of podcasts that serve to entertain listeners. Yes, radio created it. But the only reason that radio no longer has that say about it is because all that content had to go somewhere. Radio is now into podcasting. All the great things that radio gave us when it came to entertainment value, when it came to personalities, like there's a lot of surprise about certain stars that have made it into podcasting and have become stars overnight. The only thing that is kind of tough is the frequency of them. But then again, now you're not consuming a show once a day that's 3 hours long. Now you're consuming some shows that are just like, they might not be as frequent. Maybe some shows are every day consistently. But you have another plethora of the shows to listen to. You're not stuck with appointment listening anymore, much like there's no appointment viewing anymore either. And she concludes saying about, when we think about the global impact radio broadcasting had on life and society, it's not difficult to see similarities in the podcasting industry's impact on us in the modern era. Listeners still possess a strong desire to be educated or entertained by the shows they listen to. There's no entertainment or educational value that radio gives at all now. They don't. It's whatever they can put out there to fill the space of dead air so they can put advertising around it. Because the advertising is what they care about. But they don't care about what they're putting in between. They don't care. They don't. The history of radio set the tone for contemporary audio media like podcasts. It is on-the-go information, entertainment, or education that listeners can consume in their own time. Both radio and podcasts are deeply intimate audio mediums most often listened to solo. Furthermore, audio media is the only mediums that listeners can engage with and consume while multitasking, which other content mediums are unable to provide. Through a combination of technological evolution, captivating dialogue, and immersive storytelling, every podcaster today can trace the roots of their success back to the advent of radio, and they refer to War of the Worlds, commentary on H.G. Wells, all of that. Orson Welles broadcast, excuse me. They go back and refer to that, which, yeah, it's a very poignant moment. But yes, radio is responsible for what podcasting is today. But podcasting has filled the void of what radio has failed to do. Podcasting is thriving. Now, listen, I always talk about how Bob Pittman says podcasting is radio's birthright. Okay. Yes, you created the birth of podcasting, but it's because of your negligence, your ignorance, and your unwillingness to step up the corporate brass to stop cutting money and to stop using resources just to go ahead and continue to keep micromanaging and cutting and cost cutting and continue to do the same thing over and over to further diminish returns and to further diminish value to your stations. At what point does this get to continue? Listen, and I am just talking here. I don't expect radio to get imploded like I hope it would do. For whatever reason, radio is going to continue to be what they're doing, and they're not going to get called to the ground for what they're not doing. Because people are abandoning radio. Record labels said, we're not even promoting you anymore. We're going to promote to the streamers. We don't care about radio anymore. We're not even promoting to you anymore. It doesn't matter. You don't matter. You don't exist anymore. You're irrelevant. You mean nothing, radio. That's what you are. Did it have to be that way? Did we have to get to that point? No, not necessarily. But they're not doing anything about it. I'm on a roll today, man. I'm only got so many stories, but I mean, I'm so surprised. We got more podcast stories you can bring up real quick. A story that I did bring up that I saw from last week about how Spotify now is letting creators in some markets publish video podcasts. So like on Anchor, I can go and produce video podcasts. And I could do that, but I don't. I mean, I do it on YouTube only because I think that's the one place people will go and definitely find the shows. But I haven't caught myself watching video podcasts on Spotify. I haven't done that yet. I can't put myself together thinking that one platform could do both. Because the other thing, too, is that YouTube is so intertwinable. Like, I can take YouTube and I can Google cast it. You know, I could Chromecast it. I don't think I could do that, and I don't think I see the apps. Like, Spotify's app on Amazon, on the Amazon Fire Stick doesn't have the video capability yet. As far as I know, Spotify doesn't have that either in any of their platforms or any of their apps, as far as I know. So I haven't gotten there yet. But YouTube does. And there are so many podcasters on YouTube in the first place. I mean, I can appreciate where your Spotify wants to go and corner the market on it. So they are allowing creators to publish video podcasts. Though I can use Anchor and I can put my videos up. So I do one of my podcasting series. I can put them up as video, but I still want it in audio format. I don't know. I just feel like I'll take it that way. It works for me. So new markets will be allowed in the future, but there's no particular time frame. But at the moment, if you're in the U.S., Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the U.K., all English-speaking markets, you could use the Anchor platform to start uploading video content to Spotify, just as they already publish audio. And there's new tools now for video podcast creators. Their podcast subscriptions product will now be available for video podcasts, allowing creators to charge for access as they see fit. And they can offer subscribers exclusive video content or put all video behind a subscription wall while keeping the audio version of the show free. And Spotify says more monetization options are on the way as well, which there could be some sort of advertising model that comes up with it. And my thing is with YouTube is that, and that's where Spotify doesn't have that, is that if you could monetize the videos on Spotify, that's what they got to go to next. Much like they do with YouTube, because YouTube does have a pretty solid model to get ads up there. But I keep trying to put my videos up there in the hopes that my subscriber base will go ahead and go up. But my subscriber count's been going up, trickling. Like, I'm just starting to get up to near 200 subscribers. I know it's minuscule compared to others. But it's also because on YouTube, I don't put my content on purpose to make it for all audiences, because some of my content's explicit. Especially when I'm doing stuff for one of my podcasting series, I know I'm going to put adult-themed content up there. I talk about sex and dating and other things. So, and sometimes, adult-related subjects. So I don't put that out there for kids. So on purpose, I'm making it tough for my audience to reach out to me, because all my content is restricted to 18 years old and up. Even though I could put my wrestling content up there and it shouldn't be a problem, but I don't bother to do that. Now, YouTube is also trying to do something to do the same thing as we talked about, where they want to give a dedicated podcast homepage. So Spotify is trying to keep it with what YouTube is doing right now for the podcasters out there. Those are two major entities that are going out and actually helping out every podcaster monetize their content, which is what radio doesn't do. They put them to a salary, next to nothing. Maybe you get lucky, you get benefits, and then you don't even know if your job is safe or not. I'd rather have it this way if you don't mind. That's the way I saw on TechCrunch. I also saw this on TechCrunch that Facebook is looking to go ahead and kind of step away from their podcast content. They're kind of done with they're kind of finished with doing Facebook content. They're not making money on it, so they're just going to let it go. So another thing we heard about as well. Now, one story I want to bring up here, which might take up the rest of the time on the program, because there's other stuff on report on podcast audience, smart speaker owners. Let me see if I can get to that as well. But the Brookings Institute talked about content moderation when it comes to what's going on here. Story talks about policy recommendations for addressing content moderation in podcasts. They're talking political content specifically. As always, when a story like this comes up, I'm going to stay apolitical, but I think the story gives enough merit. I'm going to go and bring it up right now. So, although there are insights to be gleaned from ongoing discussions, addressing the spread of hate speech, misinformation, and related content via podcasts is different than on social media platforms, where digital media platforms host user-generated content themselves, most podcasts are hosted on the open web. Podcasting apps typically work by plugging into an external art. Well, we know what that is. We're just going to move along from that. So debates over content moderation in podcasts hinge primarily on whether and how widely to share so-called lawful but awful content. Major podcasting apps, the applications used on smartphones, tablets, and computers to listen and download podcast episodes, already have policies and procedures in place to deal with blatantly illegal content. Spotify or Apple won't knowingly distribute an Islamic state recruitment podcast, since doing so would open them to prosecution for supporting a designated terrorist group. Well, look, nobody's put anything down in terms of any kind of regulation by FCC, which, there's nothing like that here. But there are terms and conditions. And listen, they talk about censorship. Well, they can just go and look at YouTube that's done that. Spotify and Apple have done their own sense of censorship as they need to. But for whatever reason, there's a feel like there needs to be more. So below the level of blatantly illegal content, the most popular podcasting apps face the challenge of, given the scale and reach of apps like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, they both enjoy more than 25 million monthly podcast listeners in the United States. Their policies need to account for the societal harms that can result from the mass distribution of hate speech and misinformation. We know what we're talking about here. You're not a rocket scientist to understand what they're asking about. Move along. Until recently, major applications have largely refrained from balancing free speech and societal harms at all because they don't know where to intervene. It's content in the same way social media rolls content. So do we want now it to be policed? There's some people that have said that they don't want it at all. And some people that have said, well, there should be something here. Self-policing has worked for a long time. And if there's enough outcry out there, enough of cancel culture to go ahead and censor somebody, then that's what's going to happen. Obviously, the audience will determine if there's enough of an outcry for a program to go down. Look, if people had problems and was contention with Joe Rogan, he would have been taken out by now. But obviously he hasn't. And if there's any misinformation he's given, he's not apologized for it, much like anybody else has done. But remember, it's not like the FCC automatically just cancels somebody out. They'll find them first, and they'll continue to find them until they feel the need to go ahead and remove that content or shut them down. Or shut down the livelihood of the company. Remember, you're not going to get censorship through this route, Brookings. What you're going to do is you need to go ahead, if you're going to do something and you feel there's a problem, then you need to go ahead and cause lawsuits toward the platforms for hosting the content and force them to remove the content off their platform. But what's going to happen is every piece of content out there, they're always going to find another place to host. They can find a place to host themselves for free or for paid. And they could find an audience anyway, much like this show. So the content moderation in the podcasting ecosystem remains relatively underdeveloped and opaque. So they're saying that podcasting apps need to develop far more nuanced and transparent policies for the kind of content that users can download and play. Listen, if you want that for adult and for content that's been intended for children, that kind of distinction, absolutely. That's the most important thing to me. But what they're trying to say here of anything political, well, look, if it's harmful and it does create harm, it's just like getting the free speech law. But they're expecting that these companies are going to do that. These companies are not going to do any of this. Brookings Institute is barking up the wrong tree. Now, major search engines like Google or Bing have well-developed guidelines for the kind of content they will surface in search results. Those guidelines go well beyond blocking illegal content alone. Apple Podcast guidelines talk about illegal or harmful content, but their guidelines include a prohibition on defamatory, discriminatory, or mean-spirited content, but it gives no indication of how these terms are defined. YouTube and Spotify, there are no policies at all for managing election and COVID-related misinformation. The applications should have clear guidelines for what kind of podcast the app itself will recommend. Along with word of mouth, users tend to discover podcasts through a given app's most popular feature. Now, here's one thing I do as well. I will say this. When it comes to content, I mean, every podcaster, you are on the air. Okay, you're on a streaming platform. You're downloading to a device. It is dependent upon you to make sure to the public that you're reaching out to that you're serving, because you're serving the general public with your podcasts, whether subscribed or not. You need to go and make sure that your content, number one, is much like what Apple Podcast says. If it's defamatory, discriminatory, or mean-spirited, you need to go ahead and regulate what you're doing in terms of making sure that you're not hurting people. I mean, for us, we disclaim all of our content. I mean, for my content, I don't, because I'm going to stand behind every word I say. But for Cannabis Radio and WMR.FM, the two radio networks that I'm full-time committed to, every show has a disclaimer. Opinions expressed are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff or management of said station. We're going to protect ourselves in that vein. And that's something that all of you should do out there as well. If you're having guests on your program and you're worried about what they might say and you're going to use the content, and also remember, a lot of this content's not live. Let's keep this in mind too. Brookings doesn't make this point here, but I'm going to make it. If you're worried about the content, then have the content flagged, whatever episode that might be. And much like YouTube, they're going to tell you, okay, this content has copyright issues or there's something in the content that needs to be removed. Well, most of these shows, for the most part, they're being recorded, unless it's on YouTube or Twitch or some other platform where you're streaming it live. That's where you have regulation of what the content can be. But all the other content is being pre-recorded. So you can edit out whatever there might be. So you want to make sure that whatever your content you're putting out there, you want to make sure that you're protecting what is being put out, and you want to go ahead and go through it through a fine-tooth comb. Listen to it again, review it, monitor it, check it out, and make sure you're doing right by the guests you're bringing on if they're plugging or promoting a product or book or whatever kind of thing they're doing, and that the comments that are being put out there will not be misconstrued. And also, be careful of deceptive editing. That's what the news media can do. You don't need to do that. And just really, you also want to make it where you leave your guests and the hosts that you allow for just a good dialogue, and you have a plan of what you're going to do, some kind of a plan of where you're going to go with the interview, something, have a beginning and an end, and then find a way to go ahead and get to that end. Really, it's about as simple as that. Now, YouTube and other platforms have developed separate guidelines for the kinds of content their recommendation algorithms can promote. Podcasting apps like Spotify and Apple Podcasts should develop policies around the kind of podcasts they're comfortable playing on their app, but not amplifying across their user base. They're using an algorithm to recommend based on the behavior and the listening preferences and profiles of said listeners. So you're telling them to go ahead and not do that anymore. That they should go and worry about putting content that's more of your liking? Is that what we're saying? Or is it something else? They're talking about user features, about building robust measures for reporting, whereas social media platforms rely on a mix of algorithmic filtering, manual review, and user reporting to screen posts for harmful content. Podcast apps frequently do not have well-developed algorithms or in-house moderation teams to identify harmful content at scale. No, that's going to be upon the audience to do that. If you want to have a place for people to go ahead and comment, there is. There are reviews in some places. You can do that too. Absent the development of sophisticated real-time systems that allow for better monitoring of prohibited and borderline content, these apps will remain more dependent on user reporting to identify harmful content. Well, then let's find a watchdog to do it. Why don't you do that, Brookings? You have the money and the resources. You get all these donations. You could go ahead and you could do it yourself if you feel the need to do so. Don't just talk about it. Actually act upon it. If you feel like there's such a thing. Create a watchdog that will monitor content. And there's already those out there anyway in the political sense. On both sides of the political aisle. So they expect these companies to do it themselves. These corporations. They're not going to do that. You're not going to get them to do anything like that at all. What do you think you're going to do? You think Spotify and Apple Podcasts are going to listen to you? You don't spend any money for them. You are not You're just out there using your platform to go ahead and go after them because they don't go to your bidding. They don't take down the content that you don't like in political sense. Sure, okay. But if they're going to be monetizing that content and they have terms of service that are already in place, their TOS is there. If everybody's complying with it and they're going to make money off of it, then go right ahead. You know what you also do? You do what radio does, right? When you had, I always remember certain conservative radio shows, I would see from ABC radio networks that there were certain advertisers that would absolutely not sponsor. They would embargo certain shows. So do that. Let's be smart about it. You're not going to go after these corporations. Go after the advertisers and tell them they shouldn't go and advertise on these shows. If that's what you want to do, you're entitled to do it. I don't think it's going to be a good look for you, but go for it. And you tell your listeners to be active, engaged on what shows that should not be out there if that's what you feel like. Google's podcast app, users looking to report inappropriate content can send feedback via simple text form. On Spotify, neither the desktop nor iPhone app offer easy reporting process for users. For example, in Spotify's interface, it provides no means to directly report content from a podcast series page. Why don't you just go to support@spotify.com? You can go ahead and go to Spotify and find a place to go right to support and report on this. In addition to improved user reporting, some podcasting apps may consider experimenting with voting and commenting systems. Now, this is just, they're going over the top here. They have reviews that are in place for a number of apps. Okay? Apple's reporting interface highlights two essential features. One, clear icons of the primary user interface to direct users toward the reporting process. Two, multiple categories for different types of violations that link to a specific content moderation policy. Finally, in addition to improved user reporting, some podcasting apps may consider the likes of both Reddit and Stack Overflow, as well as other open to forums like Discourse, allowing users to upvote or downvote content and leave comments on posted content. Well, that's already available on blog posts for various shows, including my show, as a matter of fact. And it's to leverage the collective knowledge of the community to ensure that quality content is featured prominently across these platforms. You want to regulate. You want to control the content that's on here, and you want these companies to do it for you. Because there's certain content, which, listen, if you read the story itself, the link is in here. They're going after conservative content. Like, they're not going after liberal content. I'm not here to point fingers, but I see what they're doing. This is a political slant. They're doing it simply on political points, not about anything else. And they're talking about talk shows, which those talk shows I don't listen to. I don't catch them. If you don't like it, okay. But so Apple Podcasts does have a place to do that. Google has a place to do that. Spotify, if you want to have them do something like that, there are offering parts for the reviews. YouTube always has a place for that. Regulators should push podcasting applications to adhere to the emerging standards for transparency enumerated in the Santa Clara Principles and elsewhere. By focusing on transparency, regulators can vastly improve the quality of content moderation in the podcast ecosystem without compromising freedom of expression. It's really interesting what they want to do here. And regulators, that means the government. They want the government to intervene on this. Well, the government's already tried to intervene on social media. And you know what? The audience is going to take care of that itself. There is transparency. And the other thing, too, is you're also trying to go after some of the biggest listened to shows out there. Okay? A couple of the shows that are being featured in the platform here that they're talking about, that they're a little upset about, what they don't like, the fact is that some of them are the most listened to podcasts on said platforms. Podcast Insights, in their top 100 podcast list, some of the programs they're definitely worried about that they want to go ahead and take down. Pretty obvious who they are. And I'm not judging on one way or the other, but the audience goes one way or the other. So number one shows will be Wild from Pineapple Street Studios, Wondery, and Amazon Music. Crime Junkie is the second most, morbid a true crime podcast. The Daily from the New York Times, Dateline NBC, Sympathy Pains, Truthers Tiffany Dover is Dead, and Smartless. And then Up First, and Something Was Wrong. Those shows, I guarantee you, they don't have any issues with. But if you go down the line, okay, the Ben Shapiro Show, that's going to be one they're gonna flag. Club Random with Bill Maher, maybe. Then you go down, there you go, This American Life, they're not going to say anything about that. There's just some shows they are on here complaining about. And on Apple Podcasts, there's a number of shows that I'm looking at this moment that are in the list here. I'm looking into the top 40, top 50. I don't see what shows they're worried about. Like I said, one show that I saw that would absolutely have an issue with would be Ben Shapiro. Okay. I don't think he's really doing anything to really piss anybody off. Not at this moment. Doesn't look like it to me. I mean, you might not like his content, but is he saying anything that is basically hate speech or anything that's, disinformative or defamatory? Like, that's the question. And then the other story that they already featured on here in the Brookings Institute piece, the Dan Bongino Show, hosted by Cumulus Podcast Network, it's number 54. So, if I look at the top Spotify podcast, let me try to go and look at that list. And I guarantee it's the same thing. If you look at the top Spotify charts, that's where their issue is. Their contention is with Spotify, right? So if I look at their main podcast chart, Joe Rogan Experience is number 1. If I look at some of the other shows that they'll probably be concerned about, I'm looking. There's Ben Shapiro, the Jordan B. Peterson podcast. So obviously they're going to have an issue with that. And I'm still looking. I mean, they have about 3 shows that are really trying to point out. But other than that, I don't see anybody else that's really making much of a difference. It's what they just choose to do. It's whatever. With Spotify, YouTube, and Substack now entering the podcasting market in ways that upend the once open architecture of the medium, the space now encompasses both more traditional business models as well as newer, more decentralized ones. As a result, a flexible, broadly applicable approach to moderating content and regulating podcast platforms will be increasingly critical. By drawing on common principles and practices that have informed content moderation on other digital platforms, the approach briefly outlined above would encourage responsible content moderation without unduly restricting free speech. Well, and this is Valerie Wirtschaffer, Senior Data Analyst in the AI and Emerging Technologies Initiative at the Brookings Institute, and Chris Messarola, Fellow in Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institute and Director of Research at the Brookings Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technology Initiative. Listen, both of you, Valerie and Chris, let me explain something to you. You know where you had that content moderation? The SEC was actually regulating that, and that was in radio. There was a time we actually had that in place. They would handle the moderating of certain content. That's where your content moderation was. Just because of digital disruption failed to do that for you, and people like you couldn't have defended radio more to make sure their content stayed up to snuff so that the digital disruption would not open the door for free-range podcasting out there. Radio 2.0. You're upset that this happened, but you did nothing to curb that situation. Now, radio failed people like you, and now you're worried about the fact that, well, radio can't get that audience back, and podcasting now has the radio audience in their hands. And you have no way to stop that now. Just like social media took away the public square, now you don't have control of the public square anymore. The people have responded. That's the way they want it. That's the counterculture. The mainstream culture wants to continue to control what you're watching on TV. They want to control your choices. Meanwhile, the digital disruption offers multiple choices, a plethora of choices. So the people have spoken. They continue to leave. And listen, when Netflix goes to a certain way with content, look what's happening to them right now. They're losing subscribers. 200,000 this last quarter. So the digital disruption, hey, Netflix didn't do the right thing when it came to their content. They made some choices that did not work well for them. They lost some content, which really dominated it, made them the dominant force in the market. Well, they never found a way to get that right content that needed to work for them. And they're limiting themselves to music, to movies and television. Nothing live sports. Nothing live in general. So the other platforms are starting to pick up speed. So Disney Plus, HBO Max, Peacock, Paramount Plus, they're all capturing up on ground. Now we'll get an even playing field. That's actually pretty cool. So I appreciate Brookings for putting this out there, addressing content moderation, but I'm going to debunk the whole thing by saying that's what you had in radio. Terrestrial AM FM radio actually had that for you. And now they don't. So whose fault is it? You know, you can go and blame all the politics that you want. At least those shows are, by the way, they're moderated by radio stations. You know? Except for Joe Rogan. Ben Shapiro and Dan Bongino, they're both broadcasting on terrestrial radio stations. So if you want to go and take those shows down, you talk to their broadcasters and see what they'll say. They'll probably won't listen to you, but you could try. Because those are the shows that actually already have multiple audiences and multiple platforms. I mean, if you want to get content moderation, you want to take them down, then go to them. Go to radio. Because they're hosting and producing the programs. And podcasting just happens to be another medium for them to go and put that program and repurpose it there. Or put new content there from the same studio, the same setup. Okay? All right, that's the show tonight. All podcasting edition of the Broadcasters Podcast. I really appreciate all of you listening and checking out the show as you always do. Come back next week. There's a lot more stories I didn't even get into that I have left. So if I get to it next week, we'll talk about why Netflix is losing subscribers. You know what? By then, we probably won't even bother. Web3 is transferring to the music industry. I have that story. I'm still going to get to it at some point. The pileup of new and returning TV and the Emmy calendar and how we don't have peak TV season anymore. You know, the days of the TV Guide fall preview, that's long gone. So new shows can come up at any time, anywhere. So the whole idea of trying to control that premiere season, that's all gone. That's been gone. The digital disruption, folks. So anyway, come back next week for the Broadcasters Podcast. Until then, remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.